This is my new Kiss Looms rug rake. And this is the chair for which I need a seat pad. So I'm going to knit one on the rake, and you can knit along with me. This is a fairly common size of chair, 16 inches wide, 13 inches from the front edge up to the support posts. And that's all that I will do. I'll stop the knitting at those support posts and use ties to fasten the pad onto the chair. Let's look at the loom for a minute. Kiss Looms is emblazoned on the front of it. The pins and the pegs look the same as one another, but it's really just the same as any other Kiss Loom in operation. And you could flip it over and use it facing the other direction. However, I'm tapping what are the pegs. There are 20 of them and only 19 pins. So we get a slightly larger piece if we use it with the Kiss Looms logo facing us. Let's do a swatch and see what we get. I've already cast on, and the behavior of your hands and everything while knitting is just exactly the same as on any Kiss, with one exception. There are no grooves because they're not needed. It's perfectly easy to just stick your tool in the opening next to the stitch. Where the stitch wraps around the dowel, there's a corner back here that receives the tool beautifully. On the swatch and on the main knitting, I'll be slipping the first row, which means don't wrap it, don't knit it. For the swatch, I'm knitting every stitch, just holding those 3 strands together as I work. For the main knitting, I'll be doing something to stop the rolling at the edges, so it won't be quite the same. As always with Kiss Looms, really with all looms, I recommend not wrapping tight by tugging. You can get the fabric tight enough by proper selection of yarn. Why make it harder on your hands and harder on the loom and harder on the yarn? So let me knit a few rows, then we'll get this off and we'll test our gauge. I'm giving a lengthwise tug to set the stitches in their normal proportion. 4 stitches covers 3 inches. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6 rows covers 3 inches. So that means I'm getting 3/4 of an inch of width per stitch and 2 stitches per inch as a row gauge. Now you recall we want 16 inches of width and 13 inches of length. Here's how to figure out how many stitches we need. If we take the 16 inches of width and divide it by the 3/4 of an inch that each stitch provides, we run into a problem. We need 21.33 stitches, so that's 2 problems. I only have 20 pegs, and there's no way to knit 0.333 stitches. If I had a larger loom, I could knit 22 stitches and be pretty happy with that. Or I could add a thicker yarn, get a slightly larger stitch, but I'm going with choice C. I'm going to use my gigantic crochet hook and go around the work to finish it, because I've started trying that and I think it looks very good. Stitch gauge is a little bit wider where seed stitch is used, as I'm using it along the edge of this design. So it's possible that we will have enough total width, and if not, we can single crochet around the edge. When you go looking for a similar hook, note that this portion is just barely shy of an inch long. It's about a ½ inch across the end of the hook, and the circumference of the shaft, which can be a big player, looks like 2, and that would be 1/8 of an inch if it wasn't for the stiff metal. Let's start going from a number other than 1. Actually, it's between 2 inches and 2 1/8, so that's probably 2 1/16 inches around. So you're looking for something like that. By the way, I'll be using the Kiss Loom tool, the one with the wooden handle. This is the kind that has a removable hook, and it's replaceable with the purling hook. But I'm probably just going to stick with the regular hook throughout this project. This is very, very easy because it's 2 stitches per inch. So we turn this on, 13 times 2, 26 rows. You can do that in your head. You really don't need a calculator. And before I bind off, I'm going to double check that, because the swatch was not large, just to make sure that is coming out the way I expected, because length is adjustable. Alright, let's get started. We begin, as always, with a loop knotted into the yarn, only this time it's 3 yarns held together. I am going to cast on an E-wrap, so we'll just go across the loom, E-wrapping. Doesn't really matter if you go from the left or from the right. Now I'm going to work across, slipping the first stitch, knit, purl all the way across. Purling from the very first row with the E-wraps a little bit harder than it will be for the rest of the project, but it's not a big deal hard, just slightly more challenging. Knit. Let's see, I want to talk to you a little bit about controlling 3 strands of yarn at once. Be very careful while inserting the hook that you catch them all every time you use the hook. And the other thing is, the hand that is not knitting is letting the strands slide through, but at the same time feeling for the fact that they're sliding through at the same rate. None of them are overly stretched or making bumps and bubbles. This is not difficult. It's practically intuitive. But that's the job of, in my case, the left hand. It doesn't just get to sit around in my lap. Across we go. Here we are, row 1 complete. It ended with a knit stitch. We're going to make row 2 exactly the same, beginning with a knit stitch, but on peg 2, because we slipped peg 1, and now we'll knit and purl across. Because of the fact that we have an even number of stitches, and we're beginning each row with a slip stitch, what's happening is that my knits and purls are alternating row to row. This was a purl stitch on the row below. Now it's a knit stitch. And you know what that creates. Seed stitch, which is knit 1, purl 1, alternating both across and up and down the work. And that's to keep the back edge from rolling. Ready for the next row. We ended with a knit stitch. This was a purl stitch. Now we're going to stop with seed stitching all the way across, but we're going to keep it up along the edges using these 2 pegs. So since this was a knit stitch last time, it's going to be a purl stitch this time. So moving right to left, that will happen every time. Knit, purl. Let's make a note of that. Here's a little cheat sheet. Started right to left, slip 1, knit 1, purl 1 at the right end. And then we'll knit the rest of them across till the last 3 stitches, which will also require a note. Here we are at the last 3 stitches. Let's take a close look at them. Stitch number 3 from the edge was a purl stitch last time. So we need, moving right to left, knit, purl, knit. Let's make that note. There we go. Knit, purl, knit at the left end, all under the heading of moving right to left. Knit, purl, knit. Now, what should happen over here? We know we're going to slip that one. That one was just purled, so it's going to be knit, purl. And it turns out it's a mirror image of what happened at the other end. So really this note is correct, moving left to right as well. Slip one, knit one, purl one. Let's do it. Slip one, knit one, purl one. And knit the rest of the way across. I find that on this loom, even though it's so bulky, there's enough height on the pegs that I can wrap all the way across a row for plain knit stitches and then go back and knit them. Saves a little time, although time is not that important. And besides that, this is the fastest loom you will ever knit on. Okay, we're down to the last 3. So I'm not going to do anything with them till we consult our notes and look closely. Let me knit these all over. What went on last row? That was purled, that was knitted. Therefore, we should knit, purl, knit, and our note is still correct. So it's not really right to left, it's every row. So every row for at least 20 total will be just like the ones we've already done. I'm going to knit 20, remembering that I'm expecting to knit 26. But at 20, I'm going to stop and check the length against reality. I'm finishing up the final row before I recheck the gauge. And I do have one little tip I'd like to share. After you knit across, I've found that it's very helpful to give a downward tug to the fabric before knitting the next row. Almost ready to do that now. This keeps everything going smoothly. Now let's look. The gauge appears to me to still be what I expected, 2 rows per inch. So I will go ahead and finish my 26 rows. But we want to replicate the seed stitch at the final end of the work, same as we did at the beginning. We began in seed stitch, and when we went on to the main section, we retained that seed stitch pattern on the edges of the work. So now we can just start where we are with the same slip one, knit one, purl one pattern, and continue knitting one, purling one across, and our seed stitch will resume without a hitch in it. So 2 rows of that, just as you see me doing now. Ready for the very last stitch of the project. Now it's time to bind off. And I have been thinking about this because I want my edge to be pretty all the way around. This is the front edge. So I am going to chain bind off with my big crochet hook. Pick up a stitch, make it yarn over, and pull through 2 stitches. Let me position myself a little better for you. Pick up a stitch, and I'm using my fingers because this is so big, that's just easier. This is called yarn over. That's what I'm doing, and then pull the new yarn through both loops. Now there's 1 stitch on. I pick up the next one, insert the tulle, yarn over, pull the new yarn through both loops, and that's the edge I'm getting. So I'll go across like that. Here's the bound off piece, and it went very well. And in fact, I do have enough width. And I could stop here. The fit's pretty good, and that's a nice neat edge. But I'm going to firm up the edge with a little bit of crocheting technique. It's optional, but follow along. What I'm doing is called slip stitching, and it adds just an additional chain to the edge. See the difference. Not done yet in my left hand, finished in my right hand. We're going to insert the hook in what's called in the back loop only. This is both loops, and you could do that, but I'm going to try it this way. Insert in back loop only, yarn over, pull through both loops. This is just basically a chain stitch. Knitters often use them for various reasons in finishing and binding off. In fact, it is how we bound off. So my bind off is continuing around, and what this is doing with these edge stitches is doubling their thickness and sturdiness. And of course I have some control over how tightly I pull, so size can be slightly, very slightly, adjusted with this method. So both sides of the work will get this treatment, but first I'll continue around the back. Now I purposely cast on using E-wrap, knowing that E-wrap is not my favorite cast on for looks, but I wanted the back of the fabric to remain flexible. And E-wrap is really good about its flexibility. Let me redo this stitch. That did not come out quite right. It's a nice thing about crocheting. You can just pull out what you don't like. I should be under this loop, 3 loops on. 3 in the working yarn in my left hand, under 3. There we go. Got to talking and lost track and picked up a spare piece of black thread. These I will weave in later. For now, I'll just tuck them out of the way and ignore them. Now around the back, this is a little wider than the chair because the chair tapers in the back, and I didn't do anything about shaping. So I'm going to see about just doing the same thing that I'm doing in crochet. This is called slip stitch. We knitters usually call it chain stitch when we do it. And I'm just going to pull my stitches a little tight by feel. Down the side, I was purposely trying not to lengthen or shorten. But you can see this shortening up. And there's really no need to be overly tense about whether I get it right, because I can so easily pull it out and do it again. And unbelievably fast, you get a feel for what's right. Oh yes, see the difference? Not really very finished, beautifully finished. So across I go. Now the width across the back matches up quite nicely with the chair, and the edge is nice and firm. And on around we go, slip stitching in the back loop only. Working in the back loop only exposes the front loop, making a line parallel to what you're doing, which can be a nice finishing technique. But suppose we had needed to widen this piece. We could probably gain about 3/4 of an inch of width. I'm going to chain one here to start demonstrating single crochet in case you needed it. You could work in the back loop only, in the front loop only, or in both loops. Since I'm in the back loop, I'll just continue working that way. Insert the hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull the new one through the 2 existing ones. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. See how much wider it is? It's actually close to an inch. So if you end up with a knitted piece that doesn't quite cover your chair pad, you can make a nice finish simultaneously with widening it that little bit. I do not, however, need to widen mine. There's my last regular slip stitch, and I'll just continue. We're almost around. In my experience, chair pads do not like to stay on chairs. They would rather slide off, and it entertains them in particular if you slide off with them. So I'm going to make ties on the back of this one to tie to the chair spokes. I'm all the way around. Let me get some scissors, trim this off, and we'll weave it in. Trimming my tails, just pulling the last on through. I'll flip it over so I'm on the back. And then really I would go looking for a smaller hook probably to do the weaving in most of the time. But since I have this one in my hand, want those yarn tails secured. You don't even really need a hook for yarn of this bulkiness. Now, if like me, you know this is going to get hard wear, you can do something most unorthodox. Now that I've knotted around something in the back of the fabric, there's no way this can back out. No normal way. Then I can weave in a little bit more and snip off, knowing that things are secure. Another thing I could do is use a needle and thread to secure these ends, and I'll probably go back and do that. Looks like I need one very close to each corner, one right in the middle, and then between the middle one and each end one, another tie centered there. The length of your ties is up to you. I've opted to make mine about 1 foot long. And I'll just attach them using the crochet hook. This is another really good reason for having made sturdy stitching all the way around, because it'll hold the tie nicely. Get the ends even, yarn over, pull them through. I've only left myself enough to knot these ties. Bows are cute and everything, but I'm going to be using this on a chair that's in a workroom, and I don't need any strings hanging. First of all, the cats enjoy them more than I do, and second, there is fiber, fuzz, thread, and yarn flying everywhere. I need no more dangly bits getting in my business. Here it is finished. It's exactly what I wanted, and I have already sat on it. It is so much more comfy than sitting there with that sharp edge pushing into the back of my legs. I know yours will turn out just as wonderful.